Adrian Brendel, Imogen Cooper, I feel like applauding. Thank you. To be in this holy place, to hear such music, and be among so many that Grey loved so much, it is a marvelous tribute. Grey had the great sensitivity to let melody nourish him, a gift which extended his life by many years, I have no doubt. Music was a route to the sacred. It ordered his inner world. Since he gave me a set of Mozart for my 13th birthday, our relationship was always cultivated through classical music. Never more so than when I moved to North Wales to help Grey convalesce after COVID, mispronounced by him variously as Corvid or Corbyn. On arrival, I found him gaunt and frail, but cheerful. We were, he said, living through a panegyric. Grey made a heroic effort to enjoy life. He dressed each morning in a shirt and tie to make the journey from his study, converted hastily but elegantly by nighty into a bedroom, next door to the room with the hi-fi system, nicknamed the Boeing on account of its sophistication. Grey was rather precious about it. He once wrote in a poem, "He drives a 7-year-old car, but his audio cost more than a Jaguar." I would then be instructed to fetch 2 or 3 discs from a large library, catalogued rather demandingly by date of birth of composer, hours of sonatas, cantatas, and symphonies fills the Montgomeryshire hills. I was a big fan of Grey's amateur music criticism. Alas, he felt it too amateur to record. He made comments like, "The reason Mozart is so wonderful is because, like no one else, he understands the grammar of human experience." That was a very Grey remark. He thought of his poems as tunes. And said that he'd never learned so much about how to write them than from a workshop on Beethoven by Daniel Barenboim for the strategy, dynamics, and timing. Likewise, he felt politics to be more about team management and knowing which songs to sing than a battle of ideas. He once quipped that the only meaningful divide between Labour and Tory is about 6% difference in state spending as a percentage of GDP. Public life was at root about how to make people feel good about themselves. Ferdy and Roy's astute eulogies attest that throughout his career, Grey excelled at a diligent, charmful peacekeeping. In academia, politics, the arts, or his return to poetry, when in America with my grandmother, Bingo, to whom he was always loyal, managing the manic episodes of Robert Lowell, the brilliant, though frequently institutionalized poet, in whom Grey found a kind of surrogate father, or, as he put it, quietly undermining the less agreeable Ireland policies of Margaret Thatcher, Grey always acted with tact rather than renunciation. He was attracted to forgiveness more than righteousness, to the quiet sorting out of affairs over preached conviction. To borrow a word that Grey often used, he was less keen on the fight than in the fudge. This worldview, as Roy described so well, was neoclassical. I can't avoid speculating that the young Grey's interests in ancient forms was, in part, as a way to contain painful experiences. Shortly after his birth, his parents were away fighting in the Desert War. Grey's mother Frog became pregnant there and returned to give birth to Skimper, a gift that Grey said made the early separation entirely worth it. As I was close to Grey, so he was to his grandparents, whose influence felt very alive. Grey's paternal grandparents, Sandy and Zara, returned from Australia in 1945 after 17 years public service. After the death of their poet son, Pat, raising Grey and Skimper must have provided vital purpose. A biography I found of Sandy praises his virtues in terms that very much remind me of Grey. Loyalty, honesty, cheerful optimism, uncomplaining resilience, and fortitude in the face of setbacks. If Grey possibly got his political instincts from the Gowries, then perhaps we can trace the poetic, spiritual, Irish side back to the Fletchers. Grey's maternal grandfather was not only the son of a reverend, not only a reverend himself, he was one of 5 brothers, all reverends. The eldest, incidentally, was the childhood tutor of Grey's hero, the painter Francis Bacon. Grey described the tribe as hard-drinking, hard-hunting Anglo-Irish fellows with a good classical education. Taught snatches of the Iliad he was on Donegal walks, Grey soon showed a wild precociousness for memorizing great literature. In old age, Grey knew hundreds of poems by heart. He recited them with the unself-conscious virtuosity, with the unself-conscious delight of a virtuoso at play. I will sorely miss poetry read in Grey's rich, resonant voice and his elegant patrician accent. When I read to Grey, he would instruct me to read the poem loud, clear, quite slow, with a slight beat at the end of each line. And if I was a bit wooden, he would stop me, demonstrate the poem's rhythm, and ask me to begin again. Grey and I spoke often about politics, austerity, the Iraq War, Brexit, Corbyn, Thatcher. I learnt so much from him, not least when I changed his mind on an issue. On paper, there was much to divide us, young socialist and old Tory, but Grey was more complex than that, and he had a talent for finding common ground. He was generous with me. As a teen, when I announced that I was a Marxist, Grey would reply, "Most of the great intellectuals of my generation were Marxists," or tell me a story about Auden's early Marxist phase, or a wonderful dinner with Eric Hobsbawm. His high Anglican disposition, influenced by Auden, who Grey described as his all-unknowing honorary godfather and patron saint, was a framework for rational religion, an attempt, he wrote, to create models of a new just city which accepted human waywardness. Auden wrote that, "It is our eternal duty to be happy, a duty to which all considerations of pleasure and pain are subordinate. The supreme commandment was, love thy neighbor as thyself." Some years ago, when I was in the midst of a personal crisis, Grey gave me simple advice that we would all do well to follow. He told me, "Never lose faith that you are a good person." I can say, with some surprise, but total pride, that Grey was my best friend. I could tell him almost anything and feel he felt the same. Grey and I spoke often about dying. He taught me what a good death looks like. He had time to tie up loose ends, to get complete as far as was possible, to meditate on wonder and gratitude. One warm autumn afternoon, looking at a wild-topped tree that pleasingly reminded him of my father, Brer, drinking in the last sunny weather of the year, Grey remarked, with the wise surprise of a man who did not take life's pleasures for granted, "You know, on balance, I feel my life has really gone rather well." That day, I saw an image of peace that will remain a source of strength. To have spent so much time with Grey and Nighty in Tabane will be forever one of the great blessings of my life. Thank you all for coming. To Reverend Winkett, she will lead a prayer. We will hear a recording of Grey reading his poem Celebrate, written in Harefield Hospital while Grey was having his life saved under a team led by Magdi Yacoub. We will read a blessing together and then make our way out to Big Joe Turner, as of course, no celebration of Grey would be complete without an element of jazz.